This is called Hetrick's Army. It was published in the summer 2022 version of the Ninth Letter. The summer I turned 11, I joined Hetrick's army. Something was shifting. Boys and girls who had played together, hide and seek, Red Rover, collecting lightning bugs at night, drifted apart. The girls clustered in their rooms and listened to records. They wore nicer clothes. They giggled a lot, and sometimes they seemed to be laughing at us. They had leaped ahead in some way. To adjust to this new season, we boys had to become something new, but we didn't know what. Hetrick's army had a certain appeal. At 15, Bob Hetrick was one of the older kids in the neighborhood. His voice had deepened, and he had muscles. He wore a crew cut. He dressed in blue jeans, t-shirts, and black combat boots. He never wore shorts, even on the hot, humid Kentucky summer days. He often had a serious look, and he would squint, and the muscle in his jaw would flex. I'd see him pass my house, walking like he was on a mission. Everybody just called him Hetrick. Our neighborhood was a subdivision of single-story houses bought by young families after World War II. Every house had a picture window in the living room and a driveway dipping into a basement prone to flooding after summer storms. A TV antenna perched on every roof. Aluminum awnings shaded front porches just wide enough for 2 chairs. Backyards had clotheslines and charcoal grills. The unpaved streets were crushed gravel. There were no sidewalks. The trees were skinny. I heard about the army from Hetrick's younger brother Ben, who was my age. He called it a secret army, but he was describing it to enough people that it didn't seem very secret. He was a corporal, the only person to achieve that rank. The other 5, it was still a small army, were privates. To make sergeant, I have to recruit 2 new soldiers. You could be one of them, Ben told me. He was sitting in a narrow strip of shade cast by my house. I had just finished mowing the grass, one of my chores, and he was watching me rake. Is it like Boy Scouts or something, I asked. Ben shook his head. Boy Scouts is kid stuff. The Army is different. It would really help someone like you. How do you mean? It would toughen you up. I must have looked skeptical. Do you feel like you're tough, he asked. I shrugged. See what I mean? If you were in the Army, you'd know. Come tomorrow at 4 in my basement. We're having a bivouac. A what? It's an Army term. You'll learn. The next afternoon, I walked down the concrete steps in Hetrick's backyard and knocked at the basement door, half hoping no one would be there. I was skeptical about the Army, but it was summer vacation, and I was feeling a little at loose ends. The door opened, and Ben told me how it had to be done. He would knock back, and I was to answer with the same number of knocks minus 1. He closed the door and knocked 3 times. I answered with 2, and the door opened. Against the far concrete wall, 5 soldiers stood at attention, their arms stiffly at their sides, chests out and chins up. They were kids from the neighborhood, 6th and 7th graders, so I knew them all, including Sammy, my next-door neighbor. I hadn't known he was in the Army. Maybe it was a secret after all. Behind them hung a bedsheet painted with a crest, black and yellow lightning bolts on a red shield. It looked menacing. Otherwise, the basement looked like any other in the neighborhood. Space support poles, a washing machine beside a big sink, suitcases and a stack of boxes in one corner, a workbench with tools hanging on a pegboard, a snow shovel, rake, and brooms in the far corner. Water pipes crossed the floor joists above our heads. Bare bulbs in porcelain sockets provided light. The concrete floor sloped toward a couple of drains with round covers. Ben steered me to the line of boys. Next to him, Hetrick stood in front of us. He wore a white t-shirt and a black military belt that circled his waist and diagonally crossed his chest. He looked even more serious than usual. I put my hands in my pockets and Ben pulled them out. There was another knock on the door and Ben let in Bobby Betts, also a recruit, a fat kid from the neighborhood with sandy curly hair. Bobby was placed beside us. I could hear him breathing and smell his sweat. "We have 2 recruits today," Hetrick said. "They are here for initiation by ordeal." I swung my head toward Ben. He was looking straight ahead. "The ordeal has 3 parts: strength, power, and toughness," Hetrick said, looking at Bobby and me. "The triad of virtues in our army. If you make it, you'll be soldiers. It will be the best thing that ever happened to you. If you don't pass, you'll be failures." He shook his head sadly. I raised my hand. "Put your hand down, recruit," Hetrick said. "This isn't school." "I just have a question," I said. "No, you don't," he answered sharply. My face burned. I had wanted to ask what triad was, but mostly I wanted to say that I had not made up my mind about joining. I was just window shopping. There was a long silence, and then he said, "New recruits, step forward." Ben reached his hand around me and Bobby and pushed us ahead. "Soldiers, form the gauntlet," Hetrick said. They stood in 2 rows facing each other, 4 on one side and 3 on the other. He looked at me and said, "You first. Shirt off. Crawl, don't run. Your hands and knees have to touch the ground." I took off my shirt and started crawling. They slapped my back with sharp wax. It stung like hell, so I crawled fast. Hetrick was at the end of the line. He slapped me so hard it almost knocked me onto my face. I crawled forward and stumbled to my feet. My back felt like a dozen hornet stings. I jumped up and down to shake it off. Bobby Betts looked even fatter with his shirt off, his pale skin lumpy like oatmeal. He crawled slower than me, so he took more licks. We all returned to our places, Bobby Betts wiping tears from his chubby cheeks. Hetrick walked to the shelves above the washing machine and took down a glass-filled mason jar with holes punched in the lid. "The first part of the ordeal may have seemed like punishment, but it was for your own good. Everything you do in the army will make you tougher and stronger." He looked into my eyes, and I nodded. "The second ordeal is symbolic. Crickets chirp all night long. Once you devour one, it will never chirp again. You will have taken its voice and made it silent. That is power." Black crickets jumped against the glass, their long antennae swaying like grass in a wind. I didn't know what the word devour meant. Hetrick had a big vocabulary. He unscrewed the lid and tipped the jar, shaking gently. A cricket fell into his palm, and he closed his hand. This time he started with Bobby. He took Bobby's hand and laid his on top, passing him the cricket. "Eat this and have power," he said. That answered my question about devour. Bobby Betts looked down at his hand. His face scrunched up and turned red like he was about to cry. He pressed his lips shut, shook the cricket from his hand like it had burned him, and made for the door. He fumbled frantically with the knob, and when he jerked the door open, he fell back on his butt, scrambled to his feet, and bolted up the stairs. Through the basement window, we saw his feet flash by. Ben dropped to his hands and knees to catch the cricket, but it scuttled behind the washing machine. Hetrick clasped his hands behind his back and spoke with calm deliberation. This is a sad day for Bobby Betts. He could have become something, he said, shaking his head. Instead, he's a weakling. His eyebrows tightened into a frown. He's a lard-ass sack of shit. When you see him, you should imagine that he's lying on the ground and you are stomping his bloody face with your heels. But you should only think it. His pointed finger swept the line. If any of you lay a hand on him or speak one mean word to him, I will stick my foot so far up your ass that it comes out the top of your skull. Is that clear? The group snapped, "Yes, sir," and slapped their palms once against their thighs in unison. Hetrick shook a cricket from the jar and placed it in my hand. I felt it moving. I wondered if crickets could bite. But at that moment, one thing I knew above all else was that I didn't want to be like Bobby Betts. I closed my eyes, pushed the cricket into my mouth, and bit down. Its shell gave easily, and my mouth was flooded with slime, bitter and foul. I tried to move my tongue out of the way while I chewed twice. I made a grunting noise so I would not hear the sound of my own chewing. I bent at the waist, feeling I might gag it onto the floor. But against every instinct, I straightened up and took a hard swallow of the bitter mush. A horrid aftertaste remained, so I swallowed again. Hetrick eyed me sternly. I sensed his approval. The 6 soldiers standing at attention looked at me. I felt triumphant. The final ordeal is the barefoot run, Hetrick said, looking at me. It's also the hardest because it lasts the longest. That's the test. Can you endure? Do you have the strength of will? Can you put mind over matter? I pulled off my shoes and socks and left them on the basement floor. The soldiers kept their shoes on, and Hetrick was wearing his combat boots. On the way up the steps, I wiped my tongue on the sleeve of my shirt. No one saw me. At the edge of the yard, the army formed a circle around me, Hetrick in front. They trotted, setting the pace on the gravel street. I was in the center. The pain was a shock, like diving into ice water. The circle felt like a jail. After 20 paces, I knew I couldn't go on. Every time I came down on a sharp rock, my leg folded at the knee, and I nearly fell. I played a game with myself. I conceded that I would give up, just not yet. I'd wait 10 paces. I counted them off in my mind. Then 10 more. Then 10 more. They whisper-chanted encouragement, mind over matter. They jogged in step, and I adjusted my step to be in rhythm with theirs. I gritted my teeth and thought of each step of something I willed, willing the pain. I made it mine. I grunted in unison with the crunch of their shoes on the gravel. At the second corner, Hetrick said, "You're halfway, recruit, halfway to being a soldier." He wanted me to succeed. The soldiers whisper-chanted, mind over matter, mind over matter. When we rounded the 4th corner, I saw Hetrick's house. My feet were on fire, but my grunting was exultant. The circle of soldiers slowed, turned into the yard, and stopped. Even the lawn hurt, as if the blades of grass were cutting my feet. Ben clasped my shoulder and gave me a shake. "You did it," he said. The soldiers scrambled down the steps to the basement. I brought up the rear, limping and holding the handrail. We lined up and Hetrick said, "Billy Smith, you have shown strength, power, and toughness." He raised his straightened right arm above my head and said, "Gloria exercitus. I declare you a soldier." He brought his arm down fast and hard, his open hand striking the top of my shoulder. My body sagged, but I remained standing. He saluted me sharply. I saluted back. I was selling Christmas cards that summer, hoping to reach 40 boxes and earn a free chemistry set. The day after my initiation, I limped on my sore feet over to Maple Avenue to knock on doors of big houses with big, shady lawns. Before, I felt reluctant to knock on people's doors. Sorry to bother you was the first thing I said. This day, something had changed. I had never done anything like what I had done the day before. I kept hearing their chant, mind over matter. I wasn't even sure what it meant, but I knew how it felt. If I had eaten a cricket and run barefoot on gravel, I could do a lot more. I knocked with confidence. I was polite, but firm. I told people they should buy their Christmas cards now. Christmas season gets very busy, I said, and this is one thing you'll have out of the way. I put sincerity and verve into my voice. I said they were cheaper in the summer, which wasn't true, but I said it anyway. I sold 12 boxes that day. We remained an army of 7 plus Hetrick. The story about having to eat a cricket got around, probably thanks to Bobby Betts, and it hurt recruiting. I didn't mind that we were not getting new recruits. I felt all the more special. We had bivouacs 3 times a week. They started with Hetrick making our secret hand sign and us making it back. When our army grew to thousands, we would need it to identify each other. We marched around Hetrick's basement to orders he taught us: about face, present arms, parade rest. We did push-ups. Hetrick said the number each of us should do was all he could do plus one more. Mind over matter. I was getting stronger, and I no longer cared that boys and girls didn't play together. Let the girls go their silly way. We had something better. Hetrick told us to call him leader. He explained that Hitler had been called Führer, the German word for leader. Hitler had been our enemy, he said. If today were 20 years earlier, we would be training to fight the Germans. But when I study the Battle of Hetrick Forest, I see myself there, Hetrick said, squinting as if peering into the distance. I have dreams at night of killing a German officer and then digging his grave, pressing his iron cross in his hand before I shovel dirt over him with a tear in my eye. We should learn from the Wehrmacht. Though he was our enemy, the Führer was a great leader. At every bivouac, we lined up and Hetrick talked to us, kind of like a short sermon. A lot of it was about politics. I read only the sports page in the comic, so it was hard to follow what he said. After the Republican convention, he talked about how great Goldwater's speech was and how he should have been nominated instead of Nixon. I had never heard of Goldwater, but Hetrick said he was the only one with the guts to fight communism. The bivouac ended with us standing at attention while Hetrick looked at each of us. There was a long pause, and then he said, "Dismissed." One day when we were leaving, Sammy said to me in a low voice, "These talks are more boring than history class." At the next bivouac, Hetrick told Sammy to step forward. Hetrick said Sammy's remark was insubordination. I suspected Ben had overheard it and told his brother. Hetrick asked if we thought an insubordinate should go into the box. We answered, "Yes, leader," and slapped our thighs in unison. The box was a wooden footlocker on the other side of the basement. A boy could barely fit in it by pulling his knees into his stomach and pressing his arms into his chest. When Sammy went in, he looked scared. The lid was closed, and then we all pounded on the box while Hetrick timed 60 seconds on his watch. Even though I felt afraid for Sammy, it was exhilarating to pound on the sides of the box. When the lid was open and Sammy stood up, he was pale and sweating. Stepping out, he tripped and fell forward. Hetrick caught him by the arm and helped him to his feet. It was a leader thing to do. One afternoon when we gathered for bivouac, there was a knock on the door, and Ben admitted a girl. Her name was Brandy. She was in 7th grade, 1 year ahead of me, and she had transferred to our school in the middle of the last winter from Letcher County. She lived at the edge of town on a dirt road where people parked cars in their yards and had washing machines on their front porches. Sometimes she took a shortcut through our neighborhood, and once she had joined in a baseball game at the empty lot, holding her hands a foot apart on the bat. It seemed she had never played before. She was boxy and stout, with chin-length hair the color of a dirty penny. It fell over her face, and she kept shaking her head to get it out of her eyes. She talked with the strongest hillbilly accent I had ever heard. Her palms were black from shucking walnuts. At Hetrick's command, we lined up in formation. He told us that Brandy was here for initiation by ordeal. Our heads jutted forward, and we looked at one another. "Females can be great warriors," Hetrick said, a step ahead of us. "It's happened in history." Ben nodded. He must have recruited her. "Joan of Arc," Hetrick said. "Nakano Takeo was a female samurai. Lozin was an Apache woman who fought beside Geronimo. They don't teach you these things in school, but you need to know them." Hetrick ordered us to form the gauntlet. He said that if anyone hit easier because she was a girl, he would have to run the gauntlet himself. Just when I wondered what she would look like with her shirt off, Hetrick said she would leave it on. With Hetrick yelling encouragement, we slapped her back as hard as we could. She crawled out of the gauntlet and stood up like it was something she did every day. I knew she couldn't eat a cricket, but when Hetrick pressed one into her hand, she popped it into her mouth like it was a piece of candy, bit down, and swallowed without making a face. The soldier's eyes went wide. Hetrick explained the barefoot run. Brandy was wearing boys' shoes without socks. When she took them off, I saw that her feet were dirty. In Hetrick's yard, we formed a circle around her and jogged into the street. She trotted like the pain wasn't that bad. We chanted, "Mind over matter." Back in the basement, she did not flinch when Hetrick brought his hand down on her shoulder with the force of someone splitting a log with an axe. Now we were 8, and leader made 9. After bivouac, I walked down the street with Sammy. "Those hillbillies are tough as nails," he said. "One day on the playground, Tommy Tucker tried to lift up her dress, and she balled up her fist and hit him upside the head so hard it knocked him to the ground." "Damn, did she get into trouble?" "I don't think so. Tommy wasn't going to tell on a girl for knocking him on his ass." Then he added, "I heard her parents are in jail, and she's living here with their aunt and uncle." "No kidding?" "That's what I heard," Sammy said. After school started, we had just one bivouac a week on Saturdays. Hetrick lived on the back street of our neighborhood, and behind his house stretched a field of tall grass and weeds. Beyond the field lay a gully with a small creek flowing at the bottom, and across the gully, densely wooded hills. Hetrick led us on maneuvers up there, a machete fastened to his belt. We discovered a clearing halfway up the hill, and that became our secret encampment. Hetrick chopped down a couple of saplings to mark our territory. One day, Hetrick brought a Remington .22 rifle and a box of ammo up to our encampment. None of us had ever shot anything except a BB gun. Hetrick told us we could be fighting communists in these woods in a few years. They had taken over Cuba. Kentucky could be next. He lectured us on gun safety and then on how to shoot. After we each practiced sighting with the rifle, he set 2 tin cans on an outcropping of rock and gave us each 2 live rounds to try. It was harder than it looked. None of us could hit the cans. I figured Brandy would be terrible, just like she was at baseball and marching. She didn't seem to know her right foot from her left, and I hated to march in front of her because she stepped on my heels. But when it was her turn, she pulled the butt of the .22 against her shoulder, pressed her cheek into the stock, sighted with one determined eye, and squeezed the trigger so gently I didn't see her finger move. A can flew off the rock. Her second shot knocked off the other. On the way down the hill, I told her she was a good shot. "Them cans don't move is what makes it easy," she said. In early November, Kennedy was elected president. Hetrick had been volunteering for the Nixon office in town, putting up posters on telephone poles and passing out flyers. He had told us that Nixon would win for sure, so he was shocked at the result. At bivouac, we lined up and he told us that America was going downhill faster than he had realized. He paced back and forth in front of us. His jaw muscle flexed hard. Looking each of us in the eye, he said, "The Pope will be running the country. Do you know what that means?" He said Kennedy didn't have the guts to stand up to communism. He used one hand to karate chop his other palm. Hetrick said our army had to move from talk to action. A stray dog had showed up in our neighborhood. He was a yellow-brown, short-haired dog, long and lanky like a hound. He was always trotting, sometimes pausing to stare as if he were looking for someone, and then trotting on. His ribs showed, but his coat looked healthy. Once I saw him eating from a garbage can he had knocked over. Hetrick said the dog was an eyesore, that he probably had worms and other diseases, maybe even rabies. Did we want some little kid to get bit and die? If the dog were a human, Hetrick said, he would be a communist. Other people just complained about the dog, but our army was going to do something about it. The dog had to be exterminated. Hetrick said, "I want all of you to look for it. Loop something around its neck and bring it over here. The soldier who brings it in gets a merit." At our next bivouac, after marching and push-ups in the basement base camp, we carried tools up to our secret encampment and took turns digging a grave for the dog. I never realized digging could be so hard. Sammy got blisters and had to stop. Hetrick said it had to be that deep so wild animals wouldn't dig it up. Brandy dug as hard as anybody. Beads of sweat formed between her mouth and nose, a mustache made of droplets. When we finished, I looked into an empty grave and thought about the dog. I wondered how the others felt. The plan was to shoot him in the back of the head with the .22. Hetrick explained that with a bullet to the back of the brain, the victim, whether a dog or a person, didn't feel a thing. One afternoon after school, I was watching Mickey Mouse Club on TV when the phone rang. Ben's voice said, "Bivouac, on the double." I ran over to Hetrick's, and as soon as I entered the basement, I saw the dog tied with a clothesline to one of the support poles. In front of the sheet painted with our emblem, Hetrick stood at parade rest, holding his .22. Brandy's house did not have a phone, so Ben ran over to her street to get her. When they came in, Brandy knelt in front of the dog and scratched his chest with both hands. "You're the color of corn pone," she said. "That should be your name." I was standing next to her, and her hair smelled like ivory soap. The dog stretched out his neck and licked her face. It was the first time I had seen her smile. Hetrick frowned. "Soldier, don't fraternize with the prisoner." Brandy looked at him, still scratching the dog's chest. I don't know what that word means. It means leave him alone. She shrugged and stood up, still looking at the dog. He wagged his tail. When Hetrick wasn't looking, she scratched the dog under his chin. Hetrick told us to fall in at attention. He stood before us. His jaw muscle flexed and he said, "Today is an important day. It will help make you strong, a better soldier. When we get to camp, we'll draw lots to see who pulls the trigger. That's how firing squads work. I'll show you the spot at the back of the head." Hetrick untied the rope and handed the end to me. We filed out of the basement, Brandy just behind me. At the top of the steps, the dog balked. "Go on, Cornpone," Brandy said, pushing on his rump. He carefully climbed out of the basement. I had never eaten cornpone, but I liked the name. It seemed to fit. When we reached the fence to the field, Cornpone planted his paws in the grass, afraid to crawl between the wires of the fence. I pulled on the rope while Brandy gave another push. Cornpone put his tail between his legs and skittered through, then wagged his tail, looking up at Brandy. I thought how he didn't know what he was in for. Hetrick called out for us to observe how he was practicing safe carry of the rifle. Muzzle pointed in a safe direction and hand away from the trigger. "I'm unloaded," he said. "Ammo in my pocket. Triple safe. Always remember that." The sun had dipped behind the hills in front of us, and the air felt chilly and dank. My mouth tasted metallic. I hoped Hetrick was right about a bullet in the brain, and that Cornpone wouldn't yelp in pain. I had always wanted a dog, and I didn't see why we had to do this. If a girl could join our army, why couldn't a dog? Rin Tin Tin was an army dog. My legs started to feel like they had electricity in them, and then the strange buzz spread into my stomach. I felt like I was slipping down a steep slide with no way to stop. My mind couldn't think. Cornpone stopped to sniff a hole in the ground, and then he started to dig. "What you got, Cornpone?" Brandy said. "What's down there?" The others walked ahead. Brandy took the end of the rope from me. When we reached the gully, Brandy, Cornpone, and me, Hetrick and the other soldiers had crossed to the other side of the creek and climbed up the bank. I scooted down the side of the gully and stepped on a couple of rocks to cross the creek. I looked back and saw Brandy standing at the top of the gully with Cornpone, both of them looking down at us. "We ain't coming," she called. "Get over here, soldier," Hetrick said firmly. She tossed her head to shake her hair out of her eyes. "You ain't gonna shoot this dog," she said. "On the double," Hetrick said loudly. "That's an order." "I ain't," she said. Then she added flatly, as if stating a fact, "You'll have to shoot me." "God damn it," Hetrick said, taking a step toward the gully. "Give me the dog then, if you're going to chicken out." She slid from her pocket a folding knife and opened the blade. She held it underhanded and raised it to eye level. "Cornpone is my dog now," she said. "I done give him his name. Try and take him." Her lips curled away from her teeth. "I'll cut your eyes." Holding the knife, she stared straight at Hetrick. It was the only time I saw him at a loss for words. For a few very long seconds, no one moved. Then she turned and walked away, the open knife at her side, Cornpone trotting beside her. She did not look back. I can't be sure what the other soldiers felt, but I walked back across the field with a secret spring in my step. In the basement, we lined up in formation, our number back to 7. Hetrick stood in front of us. His jaw muscle moved in and out like a giant pulse. The worst thing any soldier can do is desert, and that's what Brandy has done. That's why you should never speak to her or look at her, ever. She doesn't exist. Understand? We slapped our thighs. Yes, leader. The response lacked its usual snap. Hillbillies are like that, he said. Any drill sergeant will tell you. They're tough, but they're ignorant as hell. A couple of the soldiers nodded, but not me. The mistake was all hers anyway, Hetrick said, chewing his lip. Whoever drew the lot to pull the trigger, the rifle wasn't going to be loaded. I exchanged a look with Sammy. Was that the truth? Hetrick went on. It was just a test to make sure everyone had the will and the courage. We didn't get to that point because the deserter ruined it. But that's another lesson. An army is like a chain. Today you saw the damage one weak link can do. Yes, leader, we said. Damn hillbillies, he muttered. They probably have a photo of Kennedy in their stinking, filthy house. Hesitantly, we walked to the basement door. He had forgotten to say dismissed.